Go back to my self-proclaimed Grim Reaper, Senator McConnell, for another second. He represents the state of Kentucky, okay? When it comes to fairness, New York State puts much more money into the federal pot than it takes out, okay? At the end of the year, we put in to that federal pot $116 billion more than we take out, okay? His state, the state of Kentucky, takes out $148 billion more than they put in, okay? So he's a federal legislator. He's distributing the federal pot of money. New York puts in more money to the federal pot than it takes out. His state takes out more than it puts in. Senator McConnell, who's getting bailed out here? It's your state that is living on the money that we generate. Your state is getting bailed out, not my state.
I give you exhibit 1535 of why you do not mess with an Italian from New York. This is Governor Cuomo ripping Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell for advocating for what his office called blue state bailouts. He said, quote, "I said yesterday we're going to push the pause button here because I think this whole business of additional assistance for state and local governments needs to be thoroughly evaluated. You raised yourself the important issue of what states have done, many of them have done to themselves with their pension programs. There's not going to be any desire on the Republican side to bail out state pensions by borrowing money from future generations." In other words, now that McConnell got done giving corporations a massive bailout with no oversight, suddenly it's time to tighten our belts when regular people in the states need help. Because why help firefighters and teachers and state public health workers when we could be dumping cash into the bottom lines of businesses that still have their bonus structures intact for executives? And just for some context here on these supposed blue state bailouts, Kentucky, which McConnell represents, is the state that receives the most money from the federal government for every dollar it puts in. For every $1 Kentucky pays to the federal government, it receives $2.41. In other words, under McConnell's leadership, Kentucky is, to use a term that Republicans so frequently criticize, a welfare state. In fact, to further expand on McConnell's critique of blue states, 13 out of the top 15 states found to be most dependent on the federal government voted for Trump in the 2016 election. Meanwhile, 10 out of the 15 least dependent states voted for Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. So if Kentucky truly wants to stop bailing out dependent states, I'm not sure his party would exactly be on board with that. But let's just call it like it is here. And that is that despite the fact that New York puts $116 billion more into the federal pot than they take out, while Kentucky takes out $148 billion more than they put in, McConnell suddenly doesn't think that they deserve help now because the 15,000 people who died in New York were predominantly Democrats. If this virus was ravaging Appalachia, you better believe that McConnell would be singing a different tune about letting the states go bankrupt. By the way, if the federal government is having trouble doling out money, consider why we're in this mess. During times of prosperity like, the last 4 years, for example, governments are supposed to save some money so that in the event of a downturn, we're not left in a situation where our reserves have run so dry that we're unable to help the states. And yet Republicans, under the leadership of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, used our strong economy not to save money or pay down the deficit, but to explode it. They gave themselves and their rich buddies a $1.5 trillion tax cut that exploded our deficit. And so now, since we are in the midst of a crisis, when we should have built up a buffer, we're only plunging ourselves further into what's looking like inescapable debt. And all of this was done under the leadership of a party that actually has the audacity to call themselves fiscal conservatives. In reality, if you want to know which party is the actual stewards of fiscal responsibility, consider that in the last 4 decades, every Republican president has added to the deficit while every Democratic president has reduced the deficit. In other words, Republicans are just skating by on talking points that have no basis in reality. And so, I can't believe I have to say this, but no, we should not allow states to go bankrupt while Americans are fighting for their lives. And the fact that McConnell believes that we should, literal days after he gave big business billions of dollars, no strings attached, goes to show exactly whose side he's on.